Good afternoon, Central Coast. Good afternoon to each and every one of you out there. I am your host, Melanie Blankenship, and I am in the studios downtown Paso Robles on this beautiful April 7th, 2025 date. I'm putting that out there just so that I can, when I go back in my archives and go, just last week I was talking about being cold, and now I'm talking about being hot. Because the extended forecast of our beautiful weather here on the central coast of California is looking like we're going to be in the 80s. I think it's like 76 degrees outside. Still a little cloudy, so the humidity is a little high, but it's absolutely beautiful. The last couple of days have been amazing, and I'm super excited to finally be warm, finally be able to not have to be dressed in layers and wondering what I'm supposed to be doing in the fields, because when it goes from one extreme to another, you kind of go into the cycle naturally. But when it just stayed cold, it was like, okay, this is going to be April and it's still this cold. Normally, March, we've had at least a week of above 75, and I think we got 2 days of it. So it's definitely something different than what we are normally used to. I don't think in weather and climate, I don't think there's anything normal anymore. But at the same time, it's, as a farmer, you always know that with weather, you kind of got to know how to roll with it and just be able to be prepared with whatever is to come. So, people are asking, this weekend, because of how beautiful it was and the market that I was at and the store, people are talking about what to plant, what is being harvested. We're so lucky where we are. The soils are so giving around here, and the wide variety of things that are being harvested all the time. It's just amazing how to think about what is available. The grass is, growing with the amount of rain that we have. So even our animals are getting nourished, and things are starting to, really come to fruition in the ranged animals. And, chickens are starting to be a lot more healthy because it's warmer. It's got the sun out. There's enough moisture in the soil to free range your chickens. It's exciting to see how, nature naturally takes its course. Yes, there's times where you're just like, can we get through this, or what is this? What imbalances do I have? And then you have moments like this that when the sun comes out, you're like, yes, everything else is game on. And you're really starting to see it right now. It's exciting to, start really feeling like it's spring. And so when people are saying what's planting now, what's harvesting now, it's different than what it normally is. Right now, normally I'm getting a ton of people that are wanting to plant all their tomato plants and pepper plants. And this year has been a little quieter on that. I'm getting more people that are still planting onions and garlic. My goodness, we've had the biggest window of opportunity to plant bare root fruit trees. Normally by the 1st of March, I am done with planting bare root trees, and the ground is compacting. It's already starting to get warm. But this year, it's been cold and wet. So we have, up until about 2 weeks ago, we were planting bare root fruit trees. Fruit trees that, in the last 5 years had already been flowered out or leafed out, that haven't even started to push any kind of bud or flower. So definitely a lot later. So we're definitely still, planting a little bit of bare root. Berries are, really starting to get into the soil temperatures of availability of planting things like strawberries. You can kind of get away with a little bit of raspberries, blackberries, but just, know your soil. Those guys really like to be planted shallow. They don't like a deep root system, in a sense, when they're starting to get established. So when you plant shallow, that doesn't mean that, okay, the ground is starting to compact and, compact from the, deep up. You want to make sure that you're planting shallow and the soil is still loose and able to drain below it. It's going to be able to breathe. It's not going to sit in compacted clay soils. We are notorious for our compacted clay soils around here, but people tend to misunderstand them. A bunch of clay is just a bunch of stored up nourishment with no oxygen in it. The moment you allow the moisture in, or allow it to be opened or loosely aerated, there's that fine line between ripping, rototilling, and aerating, right? There's lines between each one of those. And it's like, you're ripping, you're taking the topsoil as well as anything below that and ripping it up and bringing it up to the surface. You got to work on bringing a balance back to it. Rototilling is getting a little bit deeper than just the topsoil and being able to get some of the mineral mix up into the topsoil. And then aeration is just opening up that topsoil level of soil. And, so understanding, lightly aerating and allowing things to breathe and getting in there, that's where your berries definitely want to be planted, not deeper than that topsoil level. Right now with bare root fruit trees coming to flowering and starting to come awake from being asleep for such a long winter, aerating under the canopy of those trees, lightly just scratching, weeding, yes, but then also opening up the soil. It's kind of funny. We talk more about weed eating and sadly weed treatments, but we don't talk about pulling weeds anymore. And it's funny because I'll never forget in elementary school, if you talked in class or you were, kind of unruly at times, I was the one that talked too much. Imagine that. You would have the chore of going out and pulling weeds. I usually was out there with all the unruly kids who ended up being my best friends because I knew we'd always have fun together. I was the one out pulling weeds in our school because I talked too much. But, we would just go outside and pull weeds and talk even more. But at the same time, there's that pulling weeds, okay? So that's that pulling. And remember, a weed is just a plant that's misplaced. So you need to unplace that one there and make it compost or feed for animals. But at the same time, it's pulling the weeds. That is aeration. When you pull the weeds and you shake that soil, that is aeration. So, for all of us who have, dozens of fruit trees, I'm appreciative of my weed whip and my disc on my tractor that I can bring the level up so I don't go too deep and I'm just aerating. But just, for all of us smaller scale gardeners or smaller scale farmers, we tend to overlook the needs for building soil. We plant and then we think it's just going to naturally be there and keep producing. But you got to work at things. You got to build things. We continuously take away from the soil and we are very minimal in what we put back and or what we do to help the maintenance and the management of the overall soil health. Well, if you really look at the big picture, we don't even focus on soil health, let alone human health. But that's a whole nother topic. So pulling weeds or lightly aerating, that's what's going on right now. And planting berries, onions, garlic, you can definitely still plant. It's time to really start getting our soils ready for things like our tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. There are some places in this county that can get away with planting those now. But you got to remember, tomatoes thrive in average 65 degree temperatures. They'll thrive or they'll grow in above 65, but they don't start blooming or ripening until nighttime temperatures get into the 60s or even 70s. Those larger beefsteak sized tomatoes, they need a 70 plus degree nighttime temperature to bloom, flower, bloom, and pollinate and ripen. So understand that, your nightshades, your peppers, eggplant, potatoes, tobacco, if anybody grows tobacco in California, understand those are all nightshade plants and they bloom and ripen at night. So keep in mind also when they're blooming and ripen at night, bees are all in their hives or back in their boxes by the time the sun sets. So they're definitely not pollinating your tomatoes. And why I'm sharing this is because we get a lot of people that come and, I want to plant for bees or I want to do things to, stimulate bee population, because the media has definitely put some negative reports out there. But at the end of the day, it's negative to some extent. There's areas like, we're large ag in the Central Valley or Midwest, back east even too, that are having problems because they rely on pollinators. There's a lot of people in that industry that are retiring and or that just financially can't do the work anymore. So pollinators are going away. And then at the same time, we have the varroa mite. We have, different types of elements that are drastically affecting the overall health of our honeybees. You remember, honeybees in the United States are non-native. They're usually native to like regions of Europe, Russia, Asian, little bit of, Southern. I mean, now we're talking about the Africanized bee. Honeybees that put their hives above the soil are usually the ones that everybody's farming. I choose to do an Italian species of bees. And so knowing that they always put their hives above their soil is, understanding that's mostly the, agricultural production bees. So the areas like the Central Valley and the Midwest, they're having trouble with pollination, with, just the overall health of the honeybee. I'm fortunate enough, and more than likely he might be listening to this show because he told me I made friends with a beekeeper back in North Carolina, learned about his product, got a connection, and we ended up meeting. I'm now stocking his products. He makes a honey soda, and I'm stocking his products inside Nature's Touch. Ended up having multiple conversations, and it's super fun as a beekeeper on the West Coast talking to a beekeeper on the East Coast. They're talking about still at that time when I was talking about them that their bees were still in the hives hibernating in a sense. And it was hard for them to find places that were warm or they can overwinter their bees to be able to have a natural foraging during the wintertime. A lot of people move their bees or pollinators move their bees to Florida or Louisiana, but they're struggling in finding safe, clean spots that don't have contamination of chemical or, other things that are going on where they can't overwinter their honey or their beehives. Where I'm, the week that he was talking, I had to stay in town late and I was coming home, which I live towards the west side of our county. I don't live coastal, but I live going towards the coast. And it was late, and I was fortunate enough to see coming the opposite way from the coast, 20, 30 flatbed trucks full of beehives. More than likely, they're the pollinators going back to the Central Valley to pollinate all the fruit trees that are left in the Central Valley. And I was thinking about the conversation that I had with my friend on the east side. And here, these guys didn't have to drive very far and have this beautiful California coastline that is full of avocados, citrus, and so many other wild native flowers that bloom all year long that bees will forage through to keep them strong and healthy. They're able to get the minerals. And yes, again, like I said, they were non-native, but yet California is the agricultural state of pretty much the world. But at the same time, just as simple as knowing that, yes, the overall health of the honeybee is struggling, but it doesn't have to struggle. In California, in our area, is a good example to understand that we have done things that have actually benefited nature, just like the honeybee. Does it mean everybody comes here? No, but, it was a conversation that I had with my friend to the east was, isn't your coastline, doesn't it get warmer? And he goes, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, okay. So, cause he was up in the, Appalachian region of North Carolina. And, I said, so why wouldn't you move it coastal? And he said, because there's no place to actually forage bees because of the massive development. There's no farmland that would feed our bees. And so I thought about that. And then again, I've thought about some other things about how California develops and how we pay taxes for things that I scratch my head about going, okay, how is this going to sustain us? And yet the East Coast versus the West Coast. Well, I am a West Coast girl, so I'm always going to think that the West Coast is better. But again, this is something in just a casual friendship, open conversation, again, to understand where we are, what we stand on, the soil that we stand in, the possibilities of what we can really do when it comes to nature and to food production and the overall health of our soils, our insects, our actual human body. Like, there's nothing better than the fruits that come out of our soils. And yet, majority of us here locally are eating from somewhere else still. And, yes, there's this media talking about the tariffs and all of this stuff. I cannot believe that people are sitting there going towards the negative of this, which again, believe me, Wall Street is Wall Street. It's going to figure itself out, and there's going to be a diversion of funds going from one way to the other, right? That's Wall Street. It's all about an accumulation, and where is that accumulation going to go? Is it going to be this side or is it going to be that side? But at the end of the day, why would any of us in this community be so worried about tariffs on food? Okay, electronics, and look at us, Miguel, everything we're playing with is about electronics in this place. And yeah, we need to be smart and take care of our equipment, because we don't know if we're going to be able to afford it for a little while because of all these nonsense tariffs that are going to be going on. Because if we think about it, you almost kind of wonder, was any of this made in America? I doubt that look at the phone that I, carry around with me. It definitely wasn't made in America. But at the same time, food, the health, the overall ways of survival and living, shouldn't that take precedence of making sure that we are resilient to whatever comes via Wall Street or politics, that we don't have to worry about a tariff and wondering if, some other country that doesn't have the soil, doesn't have the regulation, doesn't have the ability to keep our foods as safe and clean as we do here in California. I'm still just shocked that, so many people are outraged. Can't we turn that rage into energy and getting back in the soil and restoring soil, making compost tea, planting seeds, really getting tree production back to where it was. I was thinking about, as I'm driving I went to a job with my children on Saturday afternoon, and we were driving towards Shandon. Shandon is this area, for people that are not from here, that are listening to our show. Shandon is this area that is really what gives the Golden Hill name of our community. It's kind of funny because growing up here, we were known as the Golden Hills County. People don't really talk about the Golden Hills anymore. It's more of the Vineyard Hills now. But going towards Shandon off of 41, and we're driving through and looking at the greenery, the floral, and just the overall beauty of the springtime going towards Shandon. Give it a week with the temperatures that we're going to have, and it's definitely going to be hot, so therefore it's not going to be green anymore. But it was absolutely beautiful as we're driving towards Shandon. And I'm thinking, I have pictures from when my grandma or my family, because I'm fourth generation of Paso, when they were younger. There's pictures of those areas that were covered in trees, and there's no trees anymore. It is now completely ranged or developed. You can still see a little bit of old almond orchards. You can see a little bit of, once you start up the grade, right before you come down into Shandon, there's, a little bit of vineyards, but not at the top. And I was noticing how windy it is. And yet that area right there is where I'm talking about, that actually has pictures. It actually has, tree, like scrub oak and oak trees and different types of shrubbery in these pictures of native. And I wonder, it's like, the wind, how hot it gets, and or why are we not talking about water storage? This community, you'll drive the towards the east, you're going to see no water tax signs. You're going to, here, Paso City Council meeting tomorrow. There's a meeting all about the Paso Robles Water Basin and the new authority water management that was just formed. Was it formed? How was it formed? Was that really legal how it was formed? But anyways, questions that this community should be asking. But at the same time, there's all this talk about managing water. Okay, so we're going to talk about our wells. We're going to talk about, GPSing, where our water tables are, satellite surveillance of moisture content. We're going to talk about all of this in these meetings. But at the end of the day, why aren't we talking about how we're going to restore water as a resource? We all know that we're overusing it. We all know that there really isn't. I mean, we can talk about a basin, but we're talking about the storage of what? How? But yet most of us, even in larger agriculture, don't need as much as we're using. There's been plenty of statistics and research and surveys that shows that, certain type of agriculture in this county is using way too much and they didn't really even need it. But at the same time, why aren't we planting more trees? Why aren't we promoting the moisture content to stay within the moisture? Everybody goes, okay, when I say that, everybody goes, well, trees take moisture as well. Yes, they do. But at the same time, to understand the area that I live in versus the east side. So I live on the west side and the east side. How come I'm at 47 inches of rain and Shandon's at 8 inches of rain? Yes, I'm in the coastal mountain range, but the range that I was standing at looking, I'm actually lower in altitude than I was my home is lower than where we were standing in Shandon. So, if the clouds formation is going to happen, I'm just saying, the history of our water inches accumulation. If you look at that region, I have a gentleman about 10 years ago gave me his family legacy of water accumulation or inches of rain accumulation over a 75-year lifespan. And it was crazy because Shandon area used to get a lot more precipitation than it gets now. And, it's, why? They're going to talk about climate change or they're going to talk about this, that, and everything else. But what is different is our terrain has changed by what we're growing or how we're developing. Instead of us sitting here going, we need to manage a water basin. Why aren't we promoting a more ecological planting management system? Because we all know, most of us all know, scientists will talk, well, depends on what scientists you hire, but they'll talk to you about trees. Trees stimulate water, stimulate rain, stimulate moisture. They cool the temperatures down. They, provide a resource. I guess maybe too, that back going towards that East Coast friend of mine now talking about how their climates have changed because they're taking out the hardwoods to develop cities back there and they're losing their inches of rain. And they're starting to see that their temperatures are starting to rise in their average heat span. So again, where do we draw the line? It's understanding we can sit back and let government try to figure this out and how we're going to manage water. Maybe we can look at the way that we treat our own soils and be able to work it as a balance. It's not a one size fits all. It's not, you got to do this like this now. It's the overall picture and staying put and being proud of staying put instead of being migratory all the time. If it doesn't work out here, even though I've destroyed it here, I'm just going to move and go here. What happened to taking pride in where we came from, putting our roots into the ground and growing from it? Yes, nature's neighbor, growing from our roots. There's a lot to be said behind the name of my show here. It's putting it there and building from it. There's so much research and showing that we can mitigate the ways of what is the negative impact of resources by just how we grow plants and food and understanding, promoting nature to be naturalized, but at the same time, it's not just leaving that property out there to just, grow unnative vegetation that stimulates, tons of fire fuels. We got to understand this. And there's so much knowledge and resources that are out there in this community that are available to us. And that's where I'm saying this, because it's like we're all going to sit and fight over water. We can fight over water all day long, but at the same time, what do we do to prevent the loss of water? We all need it. You cannot live without water. But how do we do this? Yes, we all know that there's some taking more than they're supposed to, but let's focus on what if that water is not there, okay? Believe me, I'm in the fight to fight for it too. But at the same time, we have to be preventative so we don't have to be so reactive. And stop thinking that some system is going to create another ordinance, regulation, fee, tax, whatever, and that's going to fix it. How is that going to fix it? Give me one other regulation out there that any of us are dealing with right now that has fixed it. Let's talk about Prop 12. Let's talk about, I can sit here and go on and on about the regulations that have come upon us in the last, 10, 15, 20 years that what is it fixed? And, who's going by them? Who's managing the regulatory system of it? Why is there a picking and choosing to who actually is going to be enforced to be compliant to that regulation? That's again where there's so much going on here, Wall Street, going on here that needs to be whatever it is. But at the end of the day, what is the resolution to prevent this all over to not continue to happen? And, that's where, a constant conversation of people that are doing it, people that understand it, that can sit here and share what is your soil that you're standing on, what type of soil. Started this show off with talking about weather and talking about what to plant. If you have dense clay, do you have sandy loam? Do you have, shale, decomposed granite? These are all different types of soils that this county, specifically North County, have. So once you understand your soils, then it's understanding wind patterns, when does it freeze? On the average, people, call me up and they're like, okay, so what tree is this? And I'm like, okay, so that's a digger pine. And I'm like, beautiful tree. And I could see the silver green in it. And it's pretty healthy. And they're like, yeah, okay. And then they'll start talking to me about what they want to plant. And I'm like, ooh, well, understand that you saw probably 20s quite a bit in the early morning hours of, mostly January, February, probably March, even this year. You saw, a low time temperature, 19, 20, 21. And they're like, no, it was like low 30s. Yeah, we did like 25. I'm like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, right? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, no. You're hitting your lows at like 4, 5, 6 a.m. And they're like, oh, wait, I wasn't up at that time. I'm like, I understand. It's okay. But the tree is already telling me that it did definitely get that cold, because that's what it thrives on. That's what makes it healthier. I think most pine trees get their moisture off the top, not off the bottom. So you're definitely more humid. You're getting a coastal influence right here. And they're like, well, we're in Santa Margarita. I'm like, yeah, but look at that gap between those two mountains right there. You see how that coastal influence just pushes through there. And what does she turn? She goes, oh yeah. She's like, by 3 o'clock, we're a lot cooler than if you just go to my neighbor's house. It's usually warmer over there. I'm like, that's why you have diggers and they don't. So, and we had this conversation. I'm using this one as an example because literally that right there was enough for us to decide what she was going to plant, how she was going to mitigate her soils to be able to she was trying to create a farm business, and she's year 3 into it and is doing very well. She's, raising animals for her USDA label. She's growing a little bit of product for farmers market where she's able to simplify it enough just to be able to, as she makes money, she's putting it back in and learning as she goes. Because, even I, as an experienced farmer, cannot ever say I know that, been there, done that, so it takes it takes time to learn it. It takes time to understand it. It takes time for it to sink in, literally, because you can think, oh, I have irrigation or I have a well. Well, what does that really mean? Because, like I've been talking about, we have water wars going on, and do you really know how much water is being pumped out of there? Do you really know how much water is available there to you? Some people have storage tanks, some people have catch ponds. Are we preventing them from evaporation? Question. But at the same time, is those, storage tanks, are they, how are you managing them? Understanding the use of water. Now we're talking about cubic feet of water, how people use it and how plants take it in. We can have that scientific information, but at the end of the day, we also got to know the soil and how does it absorb? How does it leach into the soil? How does it evaporate? I talked about this a little bit with a digger pine tree, but does that actually, it literally is the same way with soils. Knowing how soils live. Remember, a soil is a living organism. That is also the whole body of that plant. That is the cardiovascular. That is the endocrine system. That is everything but the reproductive. Reproductive is what happens above the soil. That's your flower and your fruiting. That's your reproduction. Everything else is below the soil. So if you don't have a good balance, your cardiovascular is going to be off. If you don't have good circulation and aeration, you're going to have too much sugar built up or too much salts build up, and you're going to be able to not get that heart to pump. And you're going to need to do other things in order to get that plant to produce. So, in our world, we have science and we have chemistry, and, everybody's about going and buying that over-the-counter quick drug, the nitrogen, the synthetic based nitrogens and, all of that. But knowing when you put a fertilizer into the soil, there is a byproduct to all synthetics or even organic fertilizers. There is a byproduct to make it carry or enact or to absorb. Okay. So knowing that is also then your soil is going to give your plant a quick fix, kind of like you took a shot of sugar or some other type of narcotic, and you're going to get that quick fix. But as fast as you rise, the quicker you're going to fall, right? And the soil is going to do the same thing. It's now the soil needs to heal itself. It's going to give you an imbalance. It's not going to be as flourish as it naturally was. So what comes next after you hit your plants or your soil with that synthetic based fertilizer? Aphids, whitefly, mealybugs, ants, all of that comes after that because the imbalance is there because of the fertilizer. Where using compost or building the soil over time and then planting helps give the plants what they need when they need it instead of all at once in a synthetic quick fix. It's building the soil and allowing the soil to naturally do what it needs to do instead of just, oh, here's a shot of a narcotic, so you're all good. Keep it going. It's not like that. And that is definitely what we're seeing. So knowing your soil is going to be incredibly important. But look at how I'm talking. It's understanding the soil of your plants is also understanding your own health, knowing that everything is in moderation, everything is in balance. The biggest problem I think most people have when it comes to diet and food is dehydration. And no, it's not just popping up in a bottled water and drinking water. It's because we're not eating enough moisture containing foods, but that's my opinion. And we'll bring in a chef and maybe a nutritionist to back up my stories. But at the same time, you see the overall health improve when you add fresh food. It's not about what it is, just add fresh food. It's seasonally harvested. I think you're going to see a quicker impact. And you have to remember your food flavoring or things that you like or dislike is something taught. The wine industry is key in this area to back me up on this because, they always talk about is your palate knowledgeable? You got to teach your palate, or you have to understand, the different flavor profiles. I kind of giggle on that because it's really good marketing, but at the same time, your palate is something that you've taught. So are you going to tend to go to more sweet? Are you going to go to more sugary kind of thing? Are you going to go more salty? Or do you have a really strong palate and you like bitters? I'm not that person yet. I still struggle with bitters and anything in that world, but I should, because it actually stimulates digestion and it helps overall health if I could add a little bit more bitters in my diet. But knowing that what you are used to eating is going to be the way that you tend to always go to. Understanding that your brain is going to tell you, a lot of the times when you're craving something is because your brain function is a little tired or maybe not getting enough minerals. So it wants some energy. So it's going to want to crave some more sugar, or, you're dehydrated, which is crazy because it's funny when your body starts craving more salt after you've already been, once you're already dehydrated. So understanding it's overpowering the way of thoughts. It's controlling what you've been taught by what your palate is really known to. This was a constant battle in my family with when I was raising my children, was trying to get family to understand I didn't want my children to learn sugar. Sugar was easy to teach. Once you had that flavor of sugar, that's what you're going to crave. You're going to want to have more things sweet. I was trying to keep them away from that. I succeeded to some extent, but not much. I struggle with my children still as adults to have some more vegetables, but they now are starting to get older and their bodies are changing as adults, easier to gain weight, things start to hurt, those kind of things. They're in those stages where I'm like, Mom wasn't crazy when she was telling you to eat more vegetables, huh? So, it's again, it's something taught. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not always the best example either. Me and my baked goods, can't deny coffee with cream and sugar. I can't deny that either. So it's understanding, though, it's willpower and it's changing of habits. It's convenient. We are so very lucky to be able to have the convenience of anything that we want, to be able to curb those cravings. But in the overall health of the human body is to understand consumption. We have created a society of consumed and very malnourished, and we need to change that. We can change it by what we grow, what we buy, what we eat. And what I'm saying here is that if it can be done still, it can be done here locally because of where we all are. Understanding how many beautiful ranches that we have right here that are raising chickens, that are raising pork, that are raising beef and lamb. We have the well-raised proteins. We have fruits like nobody's business. We have all the summer crops that you can, and just a little bit north and a little bit south, we have, beautiful lettuces and greens and cabbage families that are being grown. And at the same time, we can do our part in our own homes to be able to add that choice, to add that varieties of things, and also help, maybe with cost, help with exercise. I have to tell you, I'm a little sore today because I chose yesterday to go out and weed. I was pulling weeds on the side of a hill because I have a new native hedgerow that I'm growing, and instead of running the weed whip through it, I wanted to make sure that, I didn't run into anything. So I was weeding. I was pulling the weeds, and then I ran my weed whip for several hours. Well, just to be honest with you, I went through 4 batteries. And so however long that was, because it was charge it, run back, do it again, charge it, run back. So it was 4 times I did it. So however long that is, so I'm a little sore. So I'm going to tell you, I support our local gyms, but just think if you have a small garden or a small plot of soil and you're wanting to grow, or, how many conservancies or community gardens and or your neighbor's farm. Hey, I'm always looking for help. You can reach out anytime. You can come out and get licked by a cow that won't stay in a pen, and a goat that likes to jump on your back when you're on the side of the hill pulling weeds. I'm not going to say his name because I didn't name him. My husband did, and it's not appropriate to say it on the show. And so at the same time, there's a reason why he's named that. And I actually agree with his name because when you're bent over pulling weeds and there's a goat that likes to jump on you, it tends to not be very comfortable. So knowing all of that, so it's like, you want to come out, you want to work, I'm always taking volunteers. So reach out. Speaking of reaching out, if you want to be a guest on Nature's Neighbor, please reach out to either Miguel at Pastorable's podcast or me at Nature's Neighbor, Growing From Our Roots. I'm also the owner of Nature's Touch Nursery and Harvest in Templeton. I'm also affiliated with Creston Valley Meats, which is our USDA processing plant. So there's many, many outlets that you can reach me at. You can, all the social media platforms where obviously you guys know that we're live on YouTube. Have our YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook, X, all those fun social media platforms. Also, too, you want to be notified of our shows. We are being pretty consistent on a 4:00 live show right here in Paso Robles, but you want to be notified or reminded, reach out. I will be more than happy to share the link to be able to help you get in touch, keep connected, be a part of this conversation. And like I said, any topic that you want, I'm coming here weekly to share things that have been shared with me or asked of me. And instead of me just answering to that one person, because just in that 4-hour span of a market that I did on Saturday, Templeton Library Foundation fundraiser, my children helped me. The boys helped me on Saturday. And it was funny because we talked about this. I'm like, this is why I do the show. Because look at the questions, the same questions I was asked over and over and over again. So if these people are asking these questions, so are so many others. So how do I get the information out there when I'm not standing there or available to people that don't have my time schedule? So this is where it is. And it's also, let's stimulate this conversation together, because I will share experience. I will share resources. I will share, my knowledge of what is accumulated over the many years of doing this. But at the same time, I love to have the conversation of differences. It doesn't need to be my way. Let's have it your way, and let's see how we can meet in the middle. So, reach out if you want to be a guest on Nature's Neighbor. We would love to have you be a part of it. Miguel has me coming on. Miguel here, the producer here, has me coming on. What show I know I'm with Gina Hambly Lavender Farm. On Paso Robles podcast. That's on April 16th? No. Tell me what the date is, Miguel, and I'm going to share it and put it out there.
April 29th at 1:30.
There it is. April 29th at 1:30. Paso Robles podcast. Check us out. What's the topic? Just Gina and I?
Just Gina and you. We're going to record, and it'll go live the Thursday after that.
Okay. So who is Gina Hamblin? Let's talk a little bit about that, because this is kind of fun too, because this is becoming the seasons. I have some classes scheduled with her out on her farm, Hambly's Lavender Farm. Gina and I went to school together in Paso Robles High School, so you can just see the connection also there. Gina reached out to us many, many, many years ago and said, I have this property. What can we do? And I came and did a consult on her property. And, Gina kind of threw out an idea of, I've always wanted to have a flower farm or a lavender farm. And here we go. Now she has acres of it, does a fresh cut seasonal thing, she has beautiful products that she makes from her own lavender farm, as well as teaches people how to dry farm. She also just was awarded a grant for planting hedgerows, native growth around the farm that's going to stimulate more beneficial insects and understanding, just to be able to balance the diversity of that farm. It's kind of fun to see the fruition come true in that idea, because she's one of my many excitements of my life, where it's like she had an idea, she reached out to me, we shared resources back and forth. I just got a text message from her husband, Milton. We're talking about different types of raptors and reptiles and things that are going on at their farm right now. And so farmer to farmer resource. It's not about I had it all. No, I had resources to share to help them build, and what they've taken it on. I cannot wait to do the show with you, Miguel, and here with her. Check out her website, Hambly Lavender Farm, and sign up. I'm going to do a beekeeping class. I'm going to, there's a couple of classes that I'm doing on the farm at her location in San Miguel with her. So you can come out, meet us, be a part of it too. But sign up with her and join us all. It's neighbors supporting neighbors and just growing this. Speaking of beneficials, this is also that time of year. If you really want to talk about good bugs versus bad bugs, you ever want me to identify something, you can text us or email us. And we can put it right here because we're live. We'll put it up on the screen and we can identify it. If I don't know, I have plenty of resources like Rincon Vitova insectaries that I can send it to. And I could even have Gabe call in and be a part of this conversation as well too. You want a resource of never having to use a synthetic ever again. Rincon Vitova. I've been working with them since the beginning of Nature's Farm, which was 1994 is when I first put my first crop in the ground to be able to be sold, and they were my resource. And to be able to, I have whitefly in my greenhouse, and it is literally skeletonizing and just taking all the green out of all my plants. They drop shipped me some eggs of a beneficial wasp named the Incarcia formosa. I planted the eggs in my greenhouse at the right time and the right temperature. And guess what? Within 5 days, there was no whitefly whatsoever. I saw the bodies, the carcasses of them, and my plants literally within days started to green up again. But the crazy thing is before they shipped that out to me, they gave me a whole resource of why whitefly was even there. And so, again, I started this conversation talking about overall soil health. And that's okay. I was like, wait a minute, I hear myself. Understanding that is incredibly important to understand the overall health of your soil. And then we will talk about beneficials. But reach out, be a part of this conversation, and enjoy. I cannot express excitement of warm weather and the weather that we're all dealing with right now. It's motivating and stimulating. So enjoy. I'll be back next Monday. Again, want my cell phone number, 805-712-3478. Reach out. Have a good week, everyone, and thank you.